So hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today this is basically the lecture, again part of this third session of this introduction to AI, basically for the disciplines. Today we will talk about unsupervised machine learning. So in the last lectures you kind of have seen the supervised part, so with the classification and the regression. And today we will talk about the unsupervised part, which is, as you can see on the slide here, clustering. So what is unsupervised machine learning? So in general, you have a data set, you have no labels on the data set, so it's not like the training process that we have normally, where you kind of either have a label or target values, as in the regression case. Here there's no target, so we just have some kind of data set, and we want to discover new patterns in the data set. Yeah? So this is basically what you do with clustering. And in most cases, basically, this unsupervised machine learning is equivalent, of course, to clustering, so in finding new data structures within our data set and grouping similar objects together. Yeah? So the story is, we always talk about the cats and dogs sample. So imagine we have 20,000 images. Let's say 15,000 of them are from cats, 5,000 from them of dogs, and then hopefully a clustering algorithm will then find that the cats all group together and the dogs all group together without telling basically the machine beforehand this is a cat or this is a dog image. Yeah, this is what this is all about. So grouping objects that have similar features, so that kind of belong to a same group together. Unsupervised machine learning, attributing labels to objects which doesn't have them. Yeah, of course the machine will not know that this is a cat or this is a dog, but it will understand that these are two different types of images. Yeah, this is the basic idea here. So what does this look like? So you have an n-dimensional feature space. So here, for the sake of simplicity, we have two features. You can imagine even that you have hundreds of features. For instance, in an image you can have millions of features because you have millions of pixels if you want to. But let's, for the sake of simplicity, say we have two features. We have, for instance, the size of the house and the price of the house, just to have this here. And then we are looking for patterns, and we see that we kind of find here similar grouped objects together, and we can even say, okay, we have this group of houses here and we have this group of houses here, and we have kind of this second group, and in this second group we even have kind of denser structures with kinds of agglomerate, and we can say, okay, well, this is a subgroup of the blue group which has kind of stands out because they're more dense and more clustered together, these green and purple ones, than the whole blue group, and we could say they all belong to this whole blue group. Yeah, things like these are possible with clustering algorithms, and we see that in general we would have like 3 clusters, and then we would kind of with this clustering algorithm without knowing what they look like, because I mean in the 2-dimensional space, of course, we know that we see it, that these are kind of they cluster together, but in an n-dimensional space, of course, you can't even visualize this. You need some kind of algorithms to find out, okay, there are objects that are kind of similar and that are interesting to look at, and the clustering algorithm would in this case, for instance, give us 3 or maybe even, as in this case, 5 different labels on this data set, and tell, well, look into them, and this is then the story behind it. Yeah, if we go back to the cats and dogs example, we could say, okay, well, maybe these are the cats, these two, and these are the dogs, something like that. Yeah, and these are the dogs with I don't know, with cut ears, and these are the dogs, I don't know, these are the chihuahuas or some story like this. Yeah, okay. Not going too far into detail here. As we see, we have this sample space, so we have n features. And in this sample space we find, as I said, well, objects that kind of resemble each other in one way or another. Yeah, this is here the story. And then there are, of course, all kinds of different clustering algorithms, just as there are all kinds of regression algorithms and all kinds of classification algorithms. We won't again go into detail of all of them. What I want to show you then in the practical is how you can use them in scikit-learn, how to use a clustering algorithm, what you can do with it, how it looks like, how it works, how you use this with this API in a practical purpose. Here, just so that you get a feeling about how this clustering works, we will talk over the DBSCAN algorithm that we will also use in the practical. The DBSCAN algorithm is very intuitive, very easy to understand. This is why we will talk about it here in this kind of in this lecture. Yeah. So here an overview about all kinds of different clustering algorithms. You see they all have different names. Some of them require you to give them an input value about how many clusters you are actually searching for. And then they give you different results. Yeah? And you see, for instance, if we have this kind of ring structure here, that these algorithms, many of these algorithms here actually fail to discover this ring structure. Yeah, and you also, so basically we see, okay, in this case here it works, in this case here it doesn't work, in this case here it works. If there's only one cluster, as we asked for 3 clusters, it finds you 3 clusters in this mini batch k-means story, for instance. But we will talk about the DBSCAN algorithm, and we see that the DBSCAN algorithm kind of seems to work well for the first base. For the second base, yes, so density connected is this. We will talk about this later. And then we see here, well, it works for this case, but it finds these white dots, and these white dots are kind of distinguished as outliers. Yeah, as outliers. Yeah, we will go into this, why these spot dots are white and why they are not shown. Yeah, so in this case they say they don't belong to any cluster. These are kind of outliers of the data set that we can't really deal with or kind of cluster together. We see that this works for this type of set. This actually also should work for this type of data set. We see that here it found one cluster for these 2 where it should be 2 probably, and that actually we find just one cluster as it looks like for the last data set as it should be actually, no? Okay, so let's go into this density-based story, what it does, how it works, and why we use this kind of algorithm. Okay, so the DBSCAN algorithm is already quite old. It was first published in 1996, and the name is basically density-based algorithm for discovering clusters in large spatial data sets with noise. Yeah. What a spatial data set is not really defined because it can be all kinds of things. Yeah, it is not really needed to have a spatial data set. You can just have to represent it in some kind of space, yeah, to understand this a bit better, yeah. And this with noise is kind of that they say, okay, they detect these outliers, so they can say, okay, these kind of stories here, if we don't talk about them because they're kind of noise actually, even if they might not be, but we will understand quite quickly how this works. So how does this work? So we're looking for density connected objects in our clustering space. Yeah? What density connected objects are, it's not easy to understand, but we see it basically here. So we have objects that have the same density, and we want basically for a given density to find objects of this order. Yeah? And this is also why we then have this kind of noise, as they call it, because here we see that these points are kind of diffuse and they don't match the density criteria that we give the algorithms. What is the density criteria? So basically we search for a number of points given in a specific volume. Yeah, just to be known, this volume is defined by radius. Yeah, and this volume is of course in a higher dimensional space, a hypersphere. Yeah, and in this hypersphere we exceed a minimum number of points, and this of course gives you then a density. Yeah? So some objects divided over a volume give you a density, and then we will see how this algorithm works in order to extend the cluster, because we just don't want to look in one volume, but we want to extend. Basically we want to find clouds that match this kind of density. so given by points in a volume, okay, and that are connected, yeah, so density connected clouds, okay. So how does this work? So let's say we have this radius epsilon here, and we have a run with a minimal number of points given like this, and then we can basically say, okay, let's run this through, and here we see, okay, the criteria is not satisfied because I kind of find only at maximum 2 points in this neighborhood, and here we find, of course, 3 points, we find all points, we find even more than 3 points, but this is fine. The density criteria is given, and right now I look at all the neighbors that I have found, and when I look at the neighbors, is the criterion given? So then these belong to the same cluster. So here the criterion is not reached, but here the criteria is reached. So the cluster is extended, and we found basically one cluster right now, and we have these 2 points on the side, which of course would correspond in the other case to these white points where the density criteria is not reached, because basically there would be too diffuse, even if it's not obvious from this kind of little image here, it would be too diffuse in the search space, okay. We find these 2 points in here. They are, let's say, outliers because there's no density behind them. They don't match the density criteria to form a cluster, so they are outliers here. We find the second cluster with 2 points, and these are kind of called the core points. We could call these here the border points, and these are the outliers where the density criteria is not reached. And in the diagram just above, these points were shown as white points, as you have seen. Yeah, this is the whole story about how this works. You have seen above that this kind of detects all kinds of clusters correctly, and this is why we want to use this algorithm. So I hope that with this little demonstration, you have got a feeling about how you could implement the DBSCAN algorithm and about how it works. Yeah. Okay. So fine, so good. DBSCAN results. So using DBSCAN, one distinguishes, of course, these core points, neighbors, and outliers, as you have just seen before. And the results are density connected regions. So clouds, whatever form they have, which have the same density, and along this density, basically, they form one cluster. Yeah, this is what we want to search for. And this is very convenient because, as we have seen, even if our space might not be well defined, if, for instance, we have these interconnected S-forms, it can perfectly distinguish one density connected object to the other. And this is actually what we want if we use this algorithm. Okay, so fine, so good. What are the problems about this DBSCAN algorithm? So guessing the parameters can be a bit tricky. Yeah? So finding the right density to start with in order to find these clusters is not formally obvious. But there are some help. For instance, where you can do a plot if it's a two-dimensional story, or you can make a PCA and then a plot if you know what the PCA is. In this course, we will probably not go into it. But you can basically, if it's a two-dimensional stuff, you can just plot out your dataset and guess the scales by watching the dataset. Otherwise, you can just calculate, for instance, the mean of the distances of all objects and some kind of standard deviation in order to get a feeling how the distances in your dataset are distributed, and in order to select a nice epsilon parameters. Yeah, these are things that one can do. And this is basically what I say here. So taking prior knowledge into account, or calculate this prior knowledge by calculating the mean distances between the data points. Yeah. For the mean distance, of course, we will go into it later. So the distance, as you can imagine, with this DBSCAN is very important, and there's of course a question how you measure this distance. In the worst case, of course, you can run DBSCAN multiple times if you have the compute power and if your dataset is not too big. DBSCAN and distance. So as I said, the distance is of course very important. You can use basically an arbitrary distance function. You just have to make sure that this is kind of metrically reasonable. So one easy thing is does this d basically satisfy the triangle inequality or things like these. Yeah. I'm not going into details. Of course, you can use the Euclidean distance or the Manhattan distance in order to do this, so the L1 or L2 distance. There are several other distances which are defined to be a metric. You just have to think about it, what you want to have, and there are all kinds of distance functions that you could use with this kind of DBSCAN algorithm, yeah? Depending on the problem that you want to solve. Yeah? In a simple case, you can just stick to the Euclidean distance and try it out. Of course, it depends on what you want to have. Yeah, okay. So fine, so good, practical. So then later we will use this in order to investigate climate zones. So we will watch this in the next video, where we basically will deal with weather conditions in different French cities. In different French areas, let's say it better like this. This will be our practical, and you will basically in the next video then learn how to use these kind of, how to practically work with this DBSCAN algorithm, and how to use in, let's say it like this, how to use together with scikit-learn clustering algorithms to find patterns in your data that you haven't seen before. Yeah. That's the whole idea behind it. Thank you so much for listening. This is the little introduction into unsupervised learning. I hope you found it interesting. Goodbye. Bye-bye.